Hi, and welcome to JD's Longbox. I'm your host, JD. For this episode, we travel into the future of the 50th century to explore the Ballad of Halo Jones. I was first introduced to Halo Jones in the pages of Quality Comics. In the early 90s, when my sister returned from college, she gave me a set of comics filled with strange characters and titles I didn't recognize. The books she gave me were Slaying the Berserker number 2, Scavengers number 4, and Rogue Trooper issues 16 and 18. I didn't know it at the time, but Quality Comics were actually colorized reprints of British comic strips, repackaged for the American audience. Originally published in black and white in the pages of the anthology series 2000 AD, the stories were gross, dark, and often depressing. But amid the carnage, one of the ads of these books jumped out at me. It was the image of Halo Jones. With only a few images to work from, I imagined a plucky and sassy young heroine, maybe like a teenage James Bond with a futuristic fashion sense. But those images inspired me, first to do a few sketches based on that advertising art, and later in the development of some of my own characters. I often wondered what the Halo Jones character was all about, and finally I was able to track down a collected edition. The book is The Ballad of Halo Jones, Book 1, published by IPC Media Fleetway in 1984. The Ballad of Halo Jones, Book 1 originally appeared in the pages of 2000 AD, spread out over weekly issues or progs, numbers 376 to 385. The main character is Halo Jones, along with her flatmate Rodis, and the robo-dog Toby. The characters were created by Alan Moore and Ian Gibson. The writer was Alan Moore, and the artwork was Ian Gibson. Part 1. Writing. The story is about Halo Jones and her roommate Rodis, two teenage girls living in a crowded housing project known as The Hoop. Out of food and bored out of their minds, the two girls race against the clock on a shopping trip to get the supplies they need and get back to their apartment before all the passages close for the night. Was the main character's motivation clear? Halo is drugged along by the more experienced Rodis. She starts out as a reluctant tag-along instead of driving her own plot. It isn't until the very end when Halo realizes that life on the Hoop isn't for her, when she looks for a way out. This gets a 6. Did the writer make me care about the protagonist and her goal? I had fun watching Halo and Rodis and all the mischief they got into. The story and art work together to paint Halo as sympathetic while still hopeful. She feels the clear middle ground between her less confident friend Luddy and her opposite, Rodis. This gets a 7.5. Did I feel menaced by the antagonist? Well, there was no big bad out to get them. Every corridor and passageway lurked with street gangs ready to do who knows what to the two girls. The ticking clock kept the pace moving while they dodged rumblejacks, guards, and the occasional mishap. Early on, Halo witnesses what can happen to those who succumb to apathy as one of her friends is voluntarily lobotomized to have a brain implant installed that will make her part of a collective, continually bobbing their heads to a drumbeat signal broadcast into their cortex. The oppressive world of the Hoop itself is the real villain of the story. This gets an 8. Were there interesting twists and turns? Each chapter has its own thrills and spills, and each of their encounters further fleshes out the world of the Hoop. This gets a 7. Pacing. Being that this was meant to be read in a serial format, 6 pages at a time, the story flows smoothly from chapter to chapter, keeping the adventure rolling. Each chapter gets a little action and a few character moments. This gets an 8. Dialogue. The dialogue was filled with made-up words that fit the quirky world of the Hoop, though some things took a second read to understand what they were saying. But it took a little getting used to, it fit the setting and added to the world building. This gets an 8. Were the characters interesting? I have to admit, Halo Jones was less interesting than all my years of speculation had prepared me for. She wasn't the plucky, headstrong heroine that I had anticipated. Instead, she was quiet, introspective, and usually cautious. I'm looking forward to see her blossom into her own woman in the next book. This gets a 6. Part 2. Pencils. Does the style match the story or genre? Ian Gibson's art really fits the world that he and Alan Moore built. Will it be easy to say that this book drew inspiration from Blade Runner and comics like Valerian and Laureline? I think that Gibson's design creates a unique world that is as humorous as it is dangerous. You can see similar inspirations in later works like Give Me Liberty, Futurama, The Fifth Element, and even Transmetropolitan. This gets a 9. Is there good storytelling? The characters are given cartoonish facial features, but they're kept grounded by never giving us anything dynamic or heroic like you would get from a superhero comic. Ian Gibson is using all of his storytelling here. This gets a 9. Line art. The quick lines tend to go sketchy, favoring impressions over detail. It's fitting for the style of the story, but sometimes things get lost in the mix. This gets an 8. Character designs. Both the lead characters have distinctive silhouettes, Rodis with her sharp diagonal bob haircut, and Halo with her short blow-dried hair and broad shoulder pads. This gets an 8. Costumes. At first, I didn't think anything about Halo's costume other than it was futuristic clothing. But after closer inspection, I see that there's nothing special about Halo's clothing by design. She goes out clubbing in loose pants and a sweater. Her jacket, while brightly colored on the cover art, is a more rugged design, owing its influences to a motorcycle jacket and a western duster. Rodis' clothing by comparison is flamboyant and asymmetrical, possibly showing that she's the more fashion-conscious of the pair. Their clothing, while colorful and decorative, looks more like adventuring gear with their massive shoulder pads and double-breasted closures, and Halo's desert bush hat, as if a simple shopping trip could be more dangerous than a trek across the outback. Their bulky ruggedness and overt ornamentation is only outdone by the street gangs that prowl the dark corridors of the Hoop. This gets an 8.5. Props and scenery. It's a future world, but many of the things are recognizable for what they are. Gibson gives us imaginative extrapolations of what may come. It's simple storytelling shorthand and creates a believable and relatable world. This gets an 8.5. Panel flow. Gibson will occasionally leave open panels or have a character break out of the panel line. Instead of being distracting, this actually breaks the monotony of row after row of square panels. There's nothing gimmicky here, just easy to follow storytelling. This gets a 9. Part 3. Inks. The ink work is done mostly with brushes, giving soft, rounded details and organic cross-hatching. Does the style match the story? Ian Gibson's mastered the brushes on full display. A few quick strokes of ink brings things to life. He gives us a world that is both gritty and comical, which embodies the tone of the story. This gets a 9. Does the line weight add definition, shape, and depth? The heavy inks brings a weight to the images, keeping things dark without ever going too far into the grim noir we often get with American black and white books. This gets an 8.5. Part 4. Colors. For the Ballad of Halo Jones, while there were colorized editions that were published, this is the first comic that I've reviewed that was originally published in black and white. Since I plan on reviewing other black and white comics, to keep things fair, I'm only going to judge whether the lack of color enhances the experience or whether it would have benefited from having color added. I'll do this for all black and white books going forward and average their total scores accordingly. Does the black and white enhance the overall experience? Color is subjective, and each colorist has brought their own elements to the storytelling. While the addition of color does help bring definition and vibrancy, Ian Gibson's black and white world has a somber tone that can't be reached with the addition of color. This gets an 8. Overall score. This gets 136 points, or an 80%. Final take. In the world of comics, Alan Moore is the legend. He's created and reimagined some of the most memorable stories in the history of the medium. Ian Gibson has a decades-long career with 2000 AD, and is probably best known to American audiences for his work on DC's Mr. Miracle and on Judge Dredd. It was their desire to take a step away from the guns, guys, and gore that were the epitome of the 2000 AD comic that led them to the creation of Halo Jones. She doesn't have big muscles or fantastical weapons to rely on. Her problems are more mundane, like unemployment, overcrowding, and apathy. But it is this relatability that gives us a sympathetic everywoman that finds herself in over her head at every turn. Halo Jones reminds us that anyone can be a hero. While Book 1 didn't live up to my expectations, this is an origin story, and Alan Moore and Ian Gibson have many more adventures in store for Halo Jones. If you like this review, hit the thumbs up button, and if you're looking forward to my next review, be sure to subscribe. Until next time, I'm JD, and this box is closed.